Nonprofit journalism outlet ProPublica, the same group that broke the story about the depth of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's corruption, has just released another scathing report, this time about UnitedHealth Group. The highlights you're seeing are just scratching the surface of the depravity of this corporation and other for-profit healthcare providers and insurers, which brings us to this somehow controversial statement from Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Part of the deal in how we've kept this democracy, this economy, this country on a fairly steady path for more than 200 years has been that those at the top pay a little more in taxes, are a little less rich than they otherwise might be, and everybody else at least gets a chance.
Yeah.
And what happens when you turn this into the billionaires run it all is they get the opportunity to squeeze every last penny.
Yeah.
And look, we'll say it over and over. Violence is never the answer. This guy gets a trial who's allegedly killed the CEO of UnitedHealth. But you can only push people so far. And then they start to take matters into their own hands.
Yeah. While Warren would later clarify her comment, she is factually accurate in saying that people can only be pushed so far into a corner without hope for change before they resort to violence. And that sentiment doesn't just apply to health care. It applies to any kind of oppression and systemic violence that a population is suffering under. Bernie Sanders defended Warren even further from the baseless attacks that were being levied against her.
Elizabeth Warren obviously understands killing and murder and shooting somebody in the back is totally unacceptable. What you have seen rising up is people's anger at a health insurance industry which denies people the health care that they desperately need while they make billions and billions of dollars in profit. But I think what we need to ask ourselves when we talk about health care is why we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people, why we have a life expectancy which is significantly lower than in other countries, why working class people die 5 to 10 years shorter than the people on top.
You know, what stood out most about Bernie's defense of Warren was his ability to shift the focus back to the reality millions of Americans are facing every day. But let's take a moment to analyze Kristen Welker's framing of the question. By implying that Warren's comments were inflammatory, she played directly into the defenders of the ruling class who refuse to recognize the struggles of regular Americans while shielding the systems that perpetuate inequality.
Elizabeth Warren, Chris Murphy, Bernie Sanders listening way too much to the online left. But you're right, like they are just very lost on this right now, Democrats, and they are just trying to shoehorn a policy argument into a cold-blooded murder, and it's boggles my mind.
Anytime you have to have but after a statement that's about a cold-blooded murder in broad daylight, there is a problem. Yeah. And these statements are gross and abhorrent, and they should not be out there. Two things can be true, right? This is a murder that is horrible and awful, and there also could be a need for a policy debate. Do not use a cold-blooded murder to have that policy debate. It is gross that they are doing that.
Now, you may be wondering why a former Tim Scott presidential campaign advisor and a former Biden communication staffer are in complete agreement in condemning Warren and Bernie. Well, the reason becomes clear when you realize they're both defending the same political and financial system. When you strip away party lines, what they're really protecting are the interests of the ruling class and the corporations that fund them.
Never before has there been so much concentration of ownership, sector after sector, power of Wall Street, and never before in American history, and we better talk about this, have the people on top had so much political power.
It's really important that we take a step back. This is not to comment, and this is not to say that an act of violence is justified, but I think for anyone who is confused or shocked or appalled, they need to understand that people interpret and feel and experience denied claims as an act of violence against them. When we kind of talk about how systems are violent in this country, in this passive way, our privatized healthcare system is like that for a huge amount of Americans. I mean, I did not have health insurance until I got elected to Congress.
The American public's reaction to the shooting of UnitedHealth CEO Brian Thompson is not a partisan issue. It's a class issue. People from all political backgrounds have had firsthand experience or know someone who has of getting screwed over by the healthcare industry. And the media knows this. And that's why they are so desperate to shield the corporations that pay their bills from valid criticism while protecting the financial interest of the people behind them. Don't just take it from us. Listen to what Wall Street stooge Rob Sishan had to say on CNBC.
I view this as very opportunistic for somebody like Elizabeth Warren to try to take advantage of this at this time. I think
it's bipartisan bill. It should be pointed out. It's bipartisan. It's Senators Warren and Hawley, who's a Republican from Missouri, of course.
No doubt that all healthcare companies, Scott, are going to, be under some regulatory scrutiny and pressure as it relates to this. And I think anybody that owns equities in this space is going to need to re-underwrite that risk, because it's certainly going to have an impact. We have not done that yet with UnitedHealthcare. Obviously we will.
We would argue that health insurance companies using a human right like healthcare to exploit people and rake in hundreds of billions of dollars in unnecessary profits is the very definition of opportunistic. But when your only concern is maximizing profits at the expense of sick, suffering, and dying people, you'd see any criticism as a direct attack on your business model.
Why do you think they're offering?
I don't know. People, you talk about, the Supreme Court says, all these rich billionaires can give all kind of money to candidates, and that's free speech. So maybe these people are exercising their right to free speech and saying that's the way they're supporting my client.
There's a clear and growing disconnect between the public and the media and political establishment. And it all comes down to class consciousness. The media and political elite don't want the public to achieve class awareness because it would expose the systems of exploitation that benefit them. Recognizing that the healthcare industry and other essential systems are run for profit and not for the people who would empower the public to demand change. And that's exactly what the establishment is trying to prevent.